Was this a satisfying finale? Could Beard really have a Vatican City passport? Will there be a spin-off series without Ted? We'll be covering these questions and more in this video. Welcome to Square Eyes, a channel where we recap, review and take a sideways look at your favourite TV shows. In this video we'll be looking at the 12th and final episode of Season 3 of Ted Lasso, called So Long Farewell. Let's jump straight in. The episode opens with Gary Lineker and Thierry Henry reminding us that Richmond need to win their game, and Manchester City have to drop points in their game at Liverpool for Ted Lasso's team to lift the title. We're also reminded that the pundits all predicted that Richmond would finish bottom of the table at the start of the season, so they've come a long way, regardless of the outcome of the last game. Then they move on to talk about the news at West Ham, where there's a story about Rupert's inappropriate relationship with his assistant, which has led to his ownership of West Ham now being in doubt. Lex and Miss Cakes asked for Rebecca's advice in the last episode. Clearly this is the end product of her advice, and it looks like Rupert might lose another club after a relationship breakdown. Then we go to Rebecca's house, and we're tricked into thinking Ted and Rebecca slept together. Then it gets even weirder when it seems like Beard was part of the previous evening's goings-on. It's all too far-fetched to be believed though, and it turns out that there was a gas leak near their apartments, and they had to stay at Rebecca's house. So the news that Ted had to share with Rebecca at the end of the last episode wasn't that he loved her, it was that he wants to go home to Kansas. We get confirmation of this from Beard, but Rebecca says she doesn't want to talk about it yet. Then Rebecca's easily startled house cleaner turns up and quickly leaves, this being the third time that she's been startled by a man in a state of undress in Rebecca's kitchen. The first time was the handsome but vacuous man from the tumescent dating app. The second time it was Sam, and now it's Beard in his red thong and far too small t-shirt. I dread to think what Beard and Jane were trying to stop her from finding up in the guest bedroom with the dirty ropes. After the credits, Isaac, in his role as captain, is the judge of any outstanding fines that need to be paid, and they will then be used to fund the end-of-season party. Various members of the squad have to pay fines of a few £100s for minor infractions, like Jamie falling asleep during the meditation session, and Danny forgetting to text happy birthday on a teammate's birthday. But Nate is given a significant punishment of £5,000 for missing every training session, match and team dinner of the season. Nate, if anything, seems happy to be given the punishment, as it's an opportunity for him to pay penance to the team. Then we see that Ted and Beard are in different frames of mind about their return to America. Ted receives a gift from Henry, who is excited about his dad coming home, whereas Jane has shredded one of Beard's passports in an attempt to stop him from being able to travel. Though without any proper explanation, we're told that Beard has triple nationality, including Vatican City, so he'll still be able to fly home. Next we see Trent Crim distribute advanced copies of his book, which isn't finished yet, but he wants Ted and Beard's opinion on the early draft. He's calling it, somewhat predictably, the Lasso way. Then Roy storms into the dressing room, upset that his interaction with Keely in the car park earlier didn't go better. He asks the guys how to tell if a girl likes you, but Roy backs out when Ted suggests they throw the question out to a full Diamond Dogs meeting. Over in Rebecca's office, Keely and Higgins want to gossip with Rebecca about the breakdown of Rupert's marriage, but she doesn't care enough to engage. This is completely different to the Rebecca at the start of the season, who was obsessed with the idea of beating Rupert, and the Rebecca of Season 1 who wanted to destroy him. She's clearly now completely over him and ready to move on with her life. Rebecca isn't ready, however, to move on to talking about Richmond's next head coach. She doesn't want to talk about Ted's replacement, so instead they discuss financial matters. Higgins points out that the club's strong finish to the season has guaranteed them Champions League football next season, and makes them attractive to potential investors. Rebecca is intrigued about the idea of selling the whole club, even more so when Higgins tells her that she may be able to get around $2 billion for it. As Ted brings his last training session to a close, the players perform a song and dance routine as a farewell gift to him. They perform So Long Farewell from The Sound of Music, which they make an excellent job of. Ted describes the performance as perfect, which draws wild celebration from everyone involved, particularly Trent Crim, who has clearly lost all journalistic objectivity by this point in the season. Jamie talks to Keely about a promotional opportunity he's been offered in Brazil with Nike, though he uses the American pronunciation of Nike. Jamie has told them he'll only do it if Keely can come with him, which he's delighted to hear. Roy sees the end of this interaction between them, and then follows Jamie into the changing room and invites him for a beer later. Jamie seems pleased but also a bit suspicious of Roy's offer, which he should. When Rebecca goes to the Crown and Anchor to meet up with her mum, and when she tries to pay the bill, she finds out that Paul, Baz and Jeremy have already taken care of it. They say that they found the care that she's shown the club inspiring and that she's like a mother they've never had, which means that the psychic's prediction of Rebecca becoming a mother was right in a weird way. Rather than having a lovely cute baby, Rebecca has the hopes and dreams of tens of thousands of adults like these guys to nurture and support instead. Roy takes Jamie to Bones and Honey, which seems to be the only place in London that the people in this show can go out for a drink. Roy tells Jamie that he's proud of what he's achieved this season, and Jamie thanks Roy for all his help, which is a lovely and well-earned moment of friendship between the two of them. That's all quickly thrown away when Roy tells Jamie to back off Keely because he intends to get back with her, and Jamie quite rightly refuses. Things escalate from there, with Roy telling Jamie about his recent get-together with Keely, and Jamie telling Roy that a leaked video was made for him. The scene cuts away at the point where violence seems inevitable. Back at Richmond Stadium, Ted is sat on his own in the stands contemplating things when Rebecca comes to join him. She tells him that she's going to sell the club if he goes, but if he stays, she can give him a massive pay rise and he could pay for Michelle and Henry to come live in the UK. Ted doesn't reply to her offer, but it's obvious from his face that he's made his mind up that he's going to go home. Roy and Jamie, after having a fist fight, visit Keely's house and ask her to pick which of them she wants to be with. Quite rightly, rather than respond to this kind of ultimatum by going along with their silly game, Keely sends them both on their way without giving them an answer, and the two men go to find Roy a kebab. Then we get a lovely scene where Nate apologises to Ted and receives his forgiveness. Then they talk about the believe sign, which isn't there anymore, but Ted says when he looks at the space on the wall, he still sees it. The next day is match day, and we get to see some familiar faces going to the game. As the girl that plays football around Richmond with Ted, the old man that shouts abuse at Ted every time he sees him, the old couple that emulated the scene from when Harry met Sally in the Rainbow episode of Season 2, Colin's boyfriend, and Rebecca's ex-boyfriend, John Wingsnight. Over in Kansas, Henry and Michelle are excited to watch the game, but Dr. Jake is clearly not interested and makes disparaging remarks about football. It's pretty clear that we're meant to think that Michelle is irritated by him and wishes that he'd shut up. While we've been able to see from the audience's perspective that Dr. Jake is awful from the start, it now seems that Michelle can see that too. Roy then asks if he can become a diamond dog, as he wants to talk about how he's tried to change but is still the same person. He wants to be someone better, so asks if it's possible for people to change. Trent believes that people don't really change, they just learn to accept who they are. Nate has a different view though. He believes that people can and do change, sometimes for the worse and sometimes for the better. Ted and Beard give him little smiles after he says this, acknowledging how true this is of Nate. He changed quite dramatically for the worse in Season 2, and so far, it seems that he's changed for the better in Season 3. Roy thinks he's not changed, as he still feels like an idiot, but Ted points out that asking to become a diamond dog so he can talk about his struggles is a sign of personal growth. Then, as men often do when they talk about their feelings, the conversation diverts into pop culture for a while, but eventually they get back to talking about Roy's life, and Higgins makes the point that you can never be perfect, but the best thing you can do is to keep asking for and accepting help. When we find out who Rupert appointed as the new West Ham manager, it's George Hartrick, Ted's predecessor at Richmond, and a terrible pundit on Soccer Saturday. When we hear the commentators talk about the allegations of sexual impropriety against Rupert, which make it sound like he's now West Ham's answer to Harvey Weinstein. The commentators say that if West Ham win the game, they'll qualify for the Champions League, which will somehow ease the pressure on Rupert. They don't do a very convincing job of explaining how that would make any difference to the scandal he's caught up in, or exactly why him having an extramarital affair put the ownership of the club in jeopardy in the first place. I think we're just meant to go along with the premise and not think too hard about these details. Before the game, Danny gives Van Damme a new face mask, and it's an all-black one rather than the clear one he had before. After being mocked for his previous face mask, everyone likes this one, and he now wants to be known as Zorro again, essentially because this mask makes him look like the famous swordsman. Before the TV is wheeled into the changing room, we also get a glimpse of the notes Beard has written on the tactics board. He's written down the 4 principles of total football that Ted talked about earlier in the season. They are conditioning, awareness, versatility, and a 4th thing that they don't yet know. Then we see a sentimental compilation video Beard has made of memorable moments from the time him and Ted have been at the club. The players all love it, but it leaves them in floods of tears by the time the game comes around. As the game gets underway, despite playing some nice football and creating good chances, Richmond go behind to West Ham. It gets worse when news filters through that Man City are winning in their game. Another goal goes in for West Ham just before half-time, and things are looking bleak for Richmond. Before Ted gets to his half-time team talk, he gives them a farewell speech and talks about his pride in watching them develop over his time at the club. Then he tells them to go out and do their best, and asks them if anyone else has anything to add. Sam puts his hand up and then pulls out a scrap of card from his locker. It's a piece of the believe sign. Then the rest of the squad do the same. They all kept a piece and they've been holding it close to them ever since Ted tore it up. They put them all in the middle and then they arrange a sign back together. When Ted sees the assembled sign, he tells the team that it's number 4, the previously unidentified 4th ingredient of total football, belief. Then after 3, they all say Richmond, then go out and play the second half. Richmond are playing better and get back into the game. Jamie Tart scores one, then wins a penalty, which Isaac McAdoo takes. This causes widespread worry, not least from Macy Greyhound, and it looks initially like he's missed the target with a penalty that he hit at ferocious speed. But on further inspection, the ball travelled straight through the roof of the net, but it was a legitimate goal and Richmond have pulled level at 2-2. Replays of Isaac's penalty show the ball flying through the net and into the face of John Wingsnight in the stands. Rupert takes the equaliser badly, storms down to the away dugout and tells George Hartrick that he needs to do something about Jamie Tart. When George explains that he's got 2 players marking him already, Rupert says that he needs to take him out. To George's credit, he doesn't take this from Rupert and tells him to go away, but in less polite terms, which leads to Rupert pushing him over, and one of either Liam or Noel popping out of his shorts. This was Rebecca's pet name for the occasional guest appearances that came out of George's short shorts, which we found out about in the pilot. Rupert leaves the touchline area in disgrace to the chance of abuse from the stands, including sassy from the director's box. Then we see West Ham enjoy a good spell of possession, which leads to them getting the ball in the back of the net. Everyone in the Richmond bench is distraught, but Ted is unconcerned as he knew it was offside, a rule he had previously failed to understand. Beard then gives Ted some money, settling the bet that they made in the pilot about his ability to understand the offside rule. Richmond win a free kick in the dying moments of the game, and the coaches have to pick a play to try and win the match. They go for Nate's trick play from Season 1, where they use Jamie as a decoy, which he executes exactly as Ted modelled all the way back in Season 1, and it leaves Sam to run into the box unmarked and he scores the winner. Everyone celebrates wildly, and this time rather than Nate being pushed aside, like at the end of the last season, Nate jumps onto Ted and they celebrate together, like they do in the picture Nate had framed and gave to Ted as a gift. The fans stream onto the pitch to celebrate, as do the players' partners. The players kiss their girlfriends and wives like Colin talked about to Trent in the Sunflowers episode. Then he kisses his boyfriend, just like them, fulfilling his wish. We also get to see Ted dancing in the middle of the celebrating team, which is the same dance we saw him doing with his American football team back in the pilot. The celebrations weren't for Richmond winning the Premier League though, as it seemed that Manchester City held on to their lead at Liverpool and Richmond finished second. It's still been a remarkable season though, and a team like Richmond finishing second is worth this kind of celebration, even if they nearly won the whole thing. The next scene is Ted at the airport, about to leave for good. We see him taking a look at the newspapers, and a headline confirms that Rupert is leaving West Ham after he pushed over George Hartrick on the touchline of the last game. The headline of another paper reveals that Rebecca has sold 49% of the club to the fans. You have to pause it and zoom in a bit, but the article explains that season ticket holders and residents of Richmond will be eligible to own a piece of the club. As Ted is waiting to board his plane, Rebecca is waiting to say a final goodbye to him. They exchange their gratitude to each other in a warm hug, but there isn't a romantic moment that so many people online were desperate for. It still seems to me like two platonic friends, but I think you could possibly read it another way and not be wrong. It's open to interpretation. But regardless, Ted boards the plane and goes back to his son, and Rebecca stays in England. Beard is waiting for Ted on the plane, but he tells Ted that he can't do it. Despite his fierce loyalty to Ted, he can't go back to America with him and tells him he wants to stay with Jane in England. He asks for Ted's permission to get off the plane, which Ted gives, but he explains that the doors are closed, so they won't let him off. Beard has thought of this already, and he puts his plan into action, which involves faking a medical emergency with some pretty over-the-top acting. His plan works, and he's rushed off the plane, with the stewardess seeing Ted as a pretty heartless friend when he declines the offer to go to the hospital with Beard. As Rebecca is leaving the airport, she sees a girl fall over and helps her up, and when the girl's father comes to help too, it's a pilot. He lifts off his hat, and it's the boat guy from Amsterdam. This suggests they may now have a future together after being thrown together like this. To finish the series, we get a montage with father and son playing over the top of various shots, starting with Ted opening his gift from Keeley, which is a snow globe of Richmond green, which he would never have got through airport security in his hand luggage, but we don't need to think too hard about that. And we see Trent Crim looking at his feedback from Beard and Ted. Beard's notes are extensive, but Ted's only feedback is that he'd like the name to be changed to one that focuses less on him. Then we see that Keeley's PR firm is thriving, with more employees now on board, and Barbara is now part of the company name too, with them changing to KBPR. I'm guessing it stands for Keeley and Barbara PR. We then find out that Roy Kent has taken over as the new manager of Richmond, with Beard and Nate as his coaches. He decorates his office with pictures his niece Phoebe has drawn. Nate eats out with his family and Jade at a taste of Athens. Sam gets his Nigeria call-up. Jamie visits his dad and seems to be repairing his fractured relationship with him. And then there's a scene with a lot going on at a barbecue at Higgins' house. Most of the team seem to be there. Most interestingly, Jamie, Roy and Keeley and Phoebe are sat in a group, so we don't get any real closure on whether Keeley ends up in a relationship with either Jamie or Roy. We do see Rebecca turn up with the Dutch boat guy and his daughter though, so it seems like they have become an item, which is nice. As Paul and Jeremy receive their joint share in AFC Richmond, and May has hers, then we see Trent Crim in his amazing jumper, signing his book for the girl that likes to play football with Ted on Richmond Green. It's no longer called the Lasso Way, it's now called the Richmond Way, and includes a very brief foreword from Roy Kent. We also see Keeley put forward a proposal for an AFC Richmond women's team to Rebecca, which they both get very excited about. It seems bonkers that this wouldn't have happened before, but it's good that they're looking to do it now, I suppose. Then we see Roy playing with one of Ted's little army men, and it's because he's sat in Dr. Sharon's new permanent office at Richmond, as she's been given a full-time job at the club. So while he may not have had the romantic closure he wanted for Roy, at least we get to see he's getting the help he needs to move his life forward in the future. Then we see Nate repairing the Believe sign with gold paint, a Japanese technique of making broken things beautiful the psychic referred to earlier in the season called kintsugi. Once it's fixed, he sits on Roy's shoulders and they put it back where it belongs on the wall. Then we get a wedding scene, with Beard and Jane getting married in a pagan ceremony at Stonehenge, with Kenneth the team bus driver officiating and the rest of the squad looking on. Among the guests at the wedding, there's the striking redhead and the angry bald man that we last saw in the Beard After Hours episode. The man mentioned that they were trying for a baby, so it's nice to see that they've got a baby in a sling in this shot. It all finishes then with Ted going back to Kansas and being reunited with Henry. We see him giving Henry the advice to be a goldfish, which is the same advice he gave to Sam Obisanya in Season 1. The final shot is a close-up of Ted as he's looking back at Michelle. You could interpret this look a few ways, but I'd say it looks like it's one of longing, but it could be more regret or sadness. Who knows? It could be the last time we ever see this character on screen, so I suppose we'll never know. It's possible the final shot wasn't him looking at Michelle at all, and he was staring down the camera to match up the opening shot of episode 1 of this season, to show he's gone from being miserable as he says goodbye to Henry at the start of the season, to being happy as he spends time with him at the end of this season. So maybe the ending is that Ted's now a happy dad. I think this was the ending that Ted Lasso needed. About halfway through the season I had serious doubts about whether they'd be able to bring everything to a satisfying conclusion without it feeling rushed, but I think they pulled it off. Maybe some storylines felt a little bit open, like whether Roy and Keeley will get together or not, but that was a choice rather than because they weren't given enough time together on screen. Final episodes are often remembered for being letdowns, so the first job of a series finale is to not get anything massively wrong, and I think this episode did a good job of guiding all the various stories to a satisfying conclusion. Perhaps not every fan got the ending they wanted, but I think everything made sense in the world of the story, and I didn't come away feeling like there were huge loose threads or unresolved questions. As well as not making any huge mistakes, I think this episode did a great job of reminding us why this show is great in the first place. It was full of references to so many past episodes, and many early characters were given a cameo in some form or other. But these moments were all artfully woven into the story, so they felt like Easter eggs to enjoy rather than mindless fan service. I've tried to cover as many as I can in this video, but I couldn't cover all the callbacks and references, as the video would be hours long if I did. Feel free to mention any I've missed in the comments. I was a little bit surprised to see Ted end up back in Kansas with Michelle and Henry at the end. While it felt inevitable that Ted wasn't going to stay in Richmond as head coach beyond the end of this season, both from the clues within the story itself and the things Jason Sudeikis has said in interviews while promoting this season, I didn't expect the character to leave England. I suppose this was the ending he wanted, to be close with his son, and that was the most important thing for his character. Part of me felt a bit unsatisfied with this ending for Ted though. Okay, he's now closer to Henry, but what about the rest of his life? Will he go back to coaching American football, or will he get a job coaching an MLS team? Did that look towards Michelle at the very end suggest he wanted to get back together with her? It certainly seemed like Michelle was fed up with Dr. Jake from what we saw earlier in the episode, so maybe it's plausible that they'll get back together, but I'm not sure that would represent a great idea for Ted, as Michelle has treated him pretty badly in the past. From interviews I've read with Jason Sudeikis, I think, like Ted in the show, he's fed up with spending too much time away from home shooting Ted Lasso in England, so wanted a definitive ending for Ted Lasso that took him home and away from Richmond. I feel pretty convinced that some of Jason Sudeikis' own feelings of homesicknesses may have been mixed up with Ted's, and that might have been part of the motivation for ending Ted's story back in the US. It also means that if there's a future for the show, I don't think Ted will be in it. Roy's questions to the Diamond Dogs about whether people can change seemed small, but was actually incredibly central to several characters' core stories in the show. Trent talking about people not changing, but getting to know themselves better, touched on the things he said to Colin in Amsterdam about coming out and being more himself. It seems like a fairly bleak way to see the world, but I suppose deep down, most change we see in people is really just them getting to be more like the real versions of themselves. Nate's interpretation of people changing, and it being both for good and bad, tracks more with his personal journey over season 2 and 3. He let his darker motivations take hold of him for a while, but then, ultimately, made amends for things and made better choices by the end of season 3. While on the outside it may seem like he's taken a step down from managing West Ham to now being in the back room at Richmond, he's made personal progress in most other areas of his life, so finishes the season in a much happier position. And despite being the manager of Richmond now, Roy's more of a work in progress, as he knows he wants to change, but he's really at the start of that journey. The fact he started to see Dr. Sharon shows that he's at least willing to do the work of engaging with his feelings, and he can maybe start to overcome the things that are getting in his way. I was hoping that Roy and Keeley would end up together by the end of the season, but in some ways it may be better that it was left as it was. The story world carries on whether we're there or not to watch it, so we'll never know if she decides to be with Roy, Jamie, or neither of them, and it might be that we just have to live with that uncertainty, or choose our own ending if we prefer. One happy ending I didn't expect was Rebecca meeting up again with the Dutch guy from the boat. It could transpire that she becomes a stepmother to his child too, so the psychic's prediction about motherhood may reach beyond her being the mother of the likes of Paul, Barry and Jeremy from the pub. While we're talking about predictions, it seems like an interesting choice to have Man City win their game in Liverpool, so Richmond wouldn't win the whole thing, as Ted predicted would happen at the end of season 1. The celebration on the pitch after Richmond beat West Ham was the kind of reaction you would get if you just won the league, not if you'd just been pipped to the title and ended up in second place. I wonder if the original plan was to have Richmond win the league in that last game, but they decided to have them finish second instead, to leave the door open for a spin-off series. Finishing second means that there's unfinished business and makes it more compelling to do another Richmond-based TV show, with Roy Kent as the manager. That's my theory at least. My favourite line in this episode came from Mike Dean, when he said, "George, put them away. to George Hartrick after his wardrobe malfunctioned following Rupert shoving him over. Mike Dean is a real-life ex-Premier League referee, but he's actually not a bad actor, delivering his line with good deadpan comic timing. This is Mike Dean's second appearance in Ted Lasso, after he sent Nate off in Season 2 for using foul language against him during a game. Nate's job is described by Will as assistant kitman, but Nate corrects him and says it's assistant to the kitman. This is a reference to The Office, where there's a running joke where Gareth describes himself as assistant manager, but Dave and Brent corrects him every time to point out that he's assistant to the manager. The same joke was carried over to the American remake of The Office, and used between Dwight and Michael Scott. This is the second time the team have tried to bid farewell to someone with a song and dance routine. Last season the team were planning on performing Bye 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 by NSYNC to Dr. Sharon, but her early exit meant they never managed to carry out the routine for her. Beard mentions that he has triple citizenship, including a Vatican City passport. While it's technically possible he has a passport for Vatican City, it's almost certain that he wouldn't have one. I looked it up and Vatican City has a population of 800 people, and they only offer passports to current residents of the city-state. I'm guessing the writers weren't expecting anyone to be as sad as me and look it up when they threw that line in. When Ted is in the airport and looking through the newsstand, there are loads of little Easter eggs in the newspapers and magazine articles, including the news that Miss Cakes is going on Lust Conquers All, the reality show that Jamie Tartt went on when he left Manchester City at the start of Season 2. Shandy's on the cover of Entrepreneur magazine after a celebrity hookup app has been a major success. The same magazine also has an article about how Jack Danvers, the woman Keely was dating and the venture capitalist who pulled the funding from her company, is no longer a daddy's girl. In the 442 football magazine in the newsstand, one article is about how Zorro is going to star alongside Jean-Claude Van Damme in a remake of Escape to Victory. It originally is a 1981 war film which starred Sylvester Stallone, Pele, Michael Caine, Bobby Moore and Mike Summerby. Another article in 442 is about Pep Guardiola's new clothing line for men with perfect silhouettes. And the main story is about Zava coming out of retirement to play for LAFC with the quote, "They love avocado toast here," clearly showing he's always thinking about his avocado farm. Ted meets the Aussie guy again before he boards the plane home. This is his fourth appearance in the show. He took his first Aussie with Ted in the pilot episode on the plane. Then he had an Aussie with Jamie in the barbers at the end of Season 1, and asked for another with Keely in the Christmas special in Season 2, before his final cameo in this episode. I love that we find out that Beard's real name is Willis in this episode, but it's not clear from the way Ted says it if this is his first or his surname. It looks like Danny Rojas takes the same two women to Beard's wedding as he had in his bed when he had the nightmare about killing Earl Greyhound at the start of Season 2. So he seems to be in a committed polyamorous relationship that's been going on for at least a year. Beard is reading a book called Impermanence in this episode, but when I've gone to look it up like I always do, it doesn't seem to exist. I'm pretty good at looking up these sorts of things, so I'm fairly certain I've not made a mistake, so that book must be a prop that the show have created rather than the real book. Given that Beard has always read real books up to this point, there must be some kind of hidden meaning behind him reading a book called Impermanence, but I'm not completely sure what that might mean. Perhaps it's something to do with the impermanence of his time at Richmond, or his time with Ted, or everyone's time on Earth. Let me know in the comments if you have a theory. The book Ted is reading on the plane is called How to Change Your Mind, The New Science of Psychedelics by Michael Pollan. The topic of this book doesn't surprise me, as psychedelics have been a bit of a running theme in this season, with Ted and Beard taking a strange tea in Amsterdam, which Beard later confirmed to be a dud batch, and Ted's hallucination in the American diner was written off as being barbecue sauce induced. There was also Kenneth the bus driver mentioning how he was going to smoke some toad venom in the first episode, and Keely talks about smoking ayahuasca as a team-building exercise with their new employees when she's talking to Ted earlier in the season too. So, for whatever reason, psychedelics haven't been far from the writer's minds this season. The actress that plays the Dutch boat guy's daughter is the same little girl that played young Rebecca in the last episode. I don't know if this is a symbolic thing, or just to save a bit of hassle with casting. Ted's only note on Trent Grimm's book was that I'd change the title, "It's Not About Me, It Never Was." While this is Ted giving Trent advice on the name of the book, I think it's also a little nod towards a potential future direction the show could be going. So no more show called Ted Lasso, but maybe a show with a different name that still covers most of these characters, following the fortunes of AFC Richmond. I think it would be possible to keep the show going without Ted Lasso. Episode 9 and 10 of this season were great episodes and both barely featured Ted, so they've already proved that they can keep the audience's attention without having Ted as the centre of the story. The rest of the cast is strong enough to carry the show. I get the impression that Jason Sudeikis isn't interested in coming back to do more Ted Lasso, but it might be that the rest of the cast is willing to keep things going, and I think Apple TV were more than happy to throw money at a spin-off after Ted Lasso has been so successful for them. But do they have enough interesting stories to tell to justify a spin-off without Ted? Or would they be just doing it for the sake of it? Part of me thinks it might be better for the show just to end on a high after completing 3 seasons that have been pretty consistently high quality. While it's possible that a spin-off without Ted could be just as good, or maybe even better, I think it could fall flat too. It may be better to bow out with the fans wanting more than to carry on too long and slowly see fans dwindle away until nobody's interested anymore. Of course, there are other options in terms of spin-offs. The creators could instead do a brand new Ted Lasso series, following Jason Sudeikis to a new team or sport even, this time in Kansas or somewhere else in America. I'd be interested to see how Ted fares back in the US, trying to settle back into his home country, repair his relationship with Henry, and start again in a new career maybe. Or you could go more abstract and do a sitcom about the Crown and Anchor that covers May the landlady's origin story. Or do a spin-off about Beard and Jane's wild private life. There are lots more different opportunities Apple TV could commission if they wanted to. Thank you to everyone that's watched my Ted Lasso videos. I've loved making them and I've been amazed by the number of people that have taken the time to watch them. If you've liked these videos, please could you do me the favour of subscribing to the channel. I'm currently trying to get up to 1,000 subscribers and I'm 200 away, so please subscribe so you can help me towards this goal. If you'd like to relive Ted Lasso from the start, then please check out my recap and review videos that cover the whole series right from episode 1, season 1. Also, please stay subscribed to this channel if you're already subscribed, and I'm planning to make more Ted Lasso videos in the future. I'll also be making more videos about other TV series too. I think the next one will be Black Mirror Season 6, which is due to start on Netflix in the next few weeks. Thanks again for watching. Goodbye.